The human mechanic had traveled across countless stars, through endless stretches of dark space, to reach a planet that very few humans had ever seen. It was a world of strange beauty, with enormous floating mountains, skies that shifted color every few hours, and forests that glowed faintly in the dark. Despite its beauty, it was not a welcoming place. The planet was ruled by an alien queen, a powerful being whose word was law, and whose dragons were feared across the galaxy. The humans who had heard of this world spoke of its deadly creatures and of the queen's merciless rule. But the mechanic had a mission, and missions rarely came with comfort or safety. When he landed, the air felt heavier than normal. It was thick with the smell of alien flora and the faint metallic tang of technology. Machines and structures unlike anything he had seen filled the landscape. The buildings were tall, curved, and covered with lights that pulsed like the heartbeat of the planet itself. He could feel the weight of the queen's power in the air, as if even the wind obeyed her presence. The mechanic had been briefed about the dangers, but nothing prepared him for the reality. He began his work cautiously, walking through the large docking area where alien ships rested. His human instincts kept him alert. Every shadow, every movement, every sound was analyzed. He had seen dangerous creatures before, even deadly ones, but nothing compared to the dragons of this planet. They were massive, far larger than anything on Earth, with scales like sharpened metal, eyes that glowed with intelligence, and claws capable of tearing through metal. It was impossible not to feel a shiver of fear whenever one moved nearby. The humans had learned quickly that the dragons were not just animals, they were intelligent, highly aware, and capable of understanding more than the aliens themselves sometimes assumed. But the aliens approached them with power and fear, never with patience. Most humans would have turned and left the moment they realized the danger. But the mechanic had spent his life learning to understand machines, engines, and living creatures in a way that few others could. He could see patterns where others only saw chaos, and he trusted that understanding could be a bridge, even between species that seemed impossible to reach. His first days on the planet were filled with observing and repairing. He moved among alien engineers and drones, fixing engines, recalibrating machines, and adjusting components in ways that only someone with his knowledge could. He never made mistakes, and slowly, some of the alien staff began to notice. They whispered among themselves, eyes narrowing with curiosity and suspicion. Why did this human, who was so small and seemingly weak, manage to handle technology that even their own species struggled with? But it was not just the machines that interested him. The dragons, especially one that the queen kept as her personal pet, caught his attention immediately. It was the largest dragon he had ever seen, its scales black with silver streaks that reflected the sunlight like polished metal. It had wings that could block the sky when spread and eyes that seemed to see straight through him. The dragon was feared by everyone, including the alien queen, because it had a will of its own. It obeyed, but only when it chose to. Its presence was commanding, terrifying even. And yet there was a spark of curiosity in its gaze whenever the mechanic moved near. He noticed small details that others ignored. The dragon shifted its weight slightly before it moved, flexed its claws in a certain way, and made subtle sounds that seemed like communication. While the aliens commanded with force, the human watched patiently. He learned that fear could keep a dragon in line, but it could never earn loyalty. This one responded to respect and attention, and that realization filled the mechanic with a quiet confidence. One afternoon, while repairing a hovering engine near the dragon's enclosure, the mechanic saw the creature approach. It was cautious, circling him slowly, testing the ground, the sounds, and the air around him. He froze for a moment, knowing that one wrong move could mean death. Then slowly he extended his hand in a simple gesture, not demanding, not threatening, just showing presence. The dragon stopped, tilted its head, and made a low, almost curious sound. It was the first time it had approached anything without the presence of the queen's orders or the threat of punishment. The mechanic spoke softly, in tones that came naturally, even though the dragon would never understand words in the human sense. His voice was calm, steady, and carried no fear. He didn't try to command it, didn't try to touch it yet. He only allowed it to observe him, to choose what it would do next. Minutes passed, and the dragon did not attack. Instead, it inched closer, its massive claws sinking slightly into the ground with each step. His heart raced, but not with fear. This was fascination, the kind that comes from understanding a being thought to be untouchable. Nearby, the alien queen watched through a series of floating observation panels. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the human mechanic interacting with her deadliest pet. No alien had ever dared to approach it so casually. No one. She had raised the dragon herself, controlled it with fear and discipline, and it had always obeyed her commands. Yet here was a small, fragile human, moving with confidence and ease. She could not believe what she was seeing. For days, the mechanic continued his work, repairing, adjusting, and quietly observing the dragons. Each day, the creature approached a little closer. Each day, it seemed to recognize him as someone different, someone not to be feared but not to be ignored. The other aliens began to murmur. Some were angry, others suspicious, and a few secretly were impressed. They had never seen a human interact with dragons like this. It was not strength or weaponry that earned respect, it was patience, understanding, and respect itself. Despite the danger, the mechanic never stopped working. He slept in a small quarters near the docking station, ate simple meals, and kept careful notes of every observation. He documented the dragon's movements, its habits, and the ways it responded to different situations. While others saw only a dangerous beast, he saw a creature with personality, with intelligence, and with the capacity for trust. That insight would soon become far more important than any technical repair he performed on the alien machines. The alien queen, still observing, felt a growing unease. How could a human so small and seemingly weak earn the attention of her deadliest dragon? It defied everything she knew about power. Fear had always been the tool she relied on, and yet it seemed the dragon's loyalty could be swayed by something far simpler: understanding. She could not accept it yet, but the thought lingered in her mind. By the end of his first week, the human mechanic had gained more than just knowledge of alien machinery. He had gained the first glimmer of connection with a creature that even the most powerful aliens struggled to control. The dragon no longer hissed or growled at his presence. It watched him, studied him, and in moments even mirrored some of his movements. It was small progress, but progress nonetheless. And so the human mechanic continued his work, unaware of how extraordinary his small victories would become. He did not seek fame or recognition, nor did he intend to challenge the alien queen. All he wanted was to complete his mission. Yet in doing so, he had begun something remarkable, something that would one day shock even the most powerful being on the planet. The dragon, the deadliest of all, had begun to respond to him not out of fear, but out of choice. It was only the beginning, but already the mechanic could sense that nothing would ever be the same again on this alien world. After a week of careful observation, the human mechanic began to focus more closely on the deadliest dragon. He had seen it move in ways that seemed unpredictable, yet there was a rhythm to its actions if one watched closely enough. Every step it took, every flick of its tail, and every low, rumbling sound it made carried meaning. Unlike the aliens, who only understood dominance and control, he saw patterns. He realized that the dragon's intelligence was far greater than he had imagined. It was not just a creature of power, it was a creature of thought, emotion, and even choice. The dragon's eyes followed him constantly. At first it was out of curiosity. Then slowly it seemed to study him, weighing him, testing him, trying to understand what kind of being he was. The mechanic noticed small things: how it flinched at sudden movements from the aliens, how it tensed when someone raised their voice, and how it relaxed when there was calm around it. He began to mimic that calm, letting his own movements be steady and deliberate, showing the dragon that he was not a threat. Over time, the dragon began to respond with subtle gestures of trust. It lowered its head slightly when he approached and did not raise its wings in a defensive posture. The mechanic understood that gaining the dragon's trust would not be fast or easy. This was not a creature that could be controlled with force, and he had no weapons anyway. All he had was patience, observation, and the ability to connect in ways the aliens did not consider. He spent hours standing quietly near it, letting it move freely while he continued his work on nearby machines. Sometimes the dragon would make sudden movements, snapping at the air or turning sharply, but the mechanic remained still, never flinching, never showing fear. Slowly, the dragon began to mirror his calm, almost as if it was learning from him instead of the other way around. The alien queen watched from her chambers, her interest mixed with growing irritation. She had never allowed anyone close to her deadliest dragon, and now here was a human who was doing exactly that without any authority, without any power, just his presence alone. The idea that a human, a small and fragile species, could influence her dragon was almost impossible to accept. Yet she could not deny what she was seeing. The dragon's eyes, which once burned with fearsome fire at any alien who dared to approach, now seemed curious, even gentle, whenever it saw the mechanic. One day, while repairing a hovering supply vessel, the mechanic noticed something unusual. The dragon had been watching him from a distance for hours, but suddenly it moved closer than ever before. It crouched low to the ground, almost as if it was testing the air, its massive wings tucked carefully against its body. The mechanic froze in place, allowing the dragon to approach him without intimidation or threat. When it finally stopped just a few feet away, he extended his hand slowly, palm open, showing that he meant no harm. The dragon studied him for several long moments. Its eyes were sharp, intelligent, and almost unreadable, yet there was a flicker of something new: trust. It did not touch him, not yet, but it allowed his presence. It made a low, almost purring sound, unlike any growl he had heard before. The sound was deep, vibrating through the ground, and for the first time he felt a connection, a bridge of understanding forming between them. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but to him, it was a breakthrough. From that day on, the mechanic began small experiments. He tried simple gestures, pointing, nodding, and using his voice in calm tones. The dragon responded slowly, sometimes ignoring him at first, other times following a movement just once or twice. Each response, no matter how small, was celebrated in his mind. He documented every detail, noting patterns in the dragon's behavior, its reactions to specific tones, and its responses to different gestures. The more he observed, the more he realized that this creature could be guided not through fear, but through understanding. Meanwhile, the aliens began to notice. They whispered among themselves, unsure what to make of the human. Some felt anger, believing it was disrespectful for a human to approach the Queen's dragon. Others, more quietly, were amazed. They had never seen anyone, not even the strongest alien warriors, manage to interact with the creature without provoking it. The mechanic, however, paid no attention to them. His focus remained entirely on the dragon. He had learned long ago that fear and attention were not the same thing, and he trusted that consistency, calmness, and respect would yield results. One afternoon, a small incident changed everything. A younger dragon, smaller but still dangerous, approached the mechanic aggressively, snapping and hissing. The deadliest dragon, the one he had been quietly observing, reacted immediately. Instead of joining the attack, it positioned itself between the mechanic and the younger dragon, spreading its wings slightly in a protective stance. It was subtle but unmistakable. The dragon was defending him, even though no one had given a command, even though no human should have had that kind of influence. The mechanic could hardly believe it. He stayed still, slowly raising his hand in a gentle motion. The dragon paused, then relaxed slightly, but it did not leave his side. He realized, with a mixture of awe and disbelief, that the creature had made a choice. It had chosen to protect him, not because it had been forced to, not because it feared punishment, but because it seemed to trust him. The alien queen watched this event unfold through her observation panels, her shock growing by the minute. She had always believed that control over her dragons was absolute. Fear, strength, and dominance had always been enough. Yet here was a human, someone smaller and weaker than any alien, commanding attention and even loyalty through methods she could barely comprehend. Her dragon, the most feared of all, had acted against instinct in favor of this human. The realization unsettled her deeply. The human mechanic continued his work, now more confident than ever. He knew that the dragon's trust would not come all at once, and he was patient. Every interaction, every small gesture, every calm movement built upon the last. He learned that shouting, forcing, or threatening would undo progress. Only through calm understanding and gentle guidance could the dragon respond positively. It was not easy. Days passed with little change, and there were moments of tension when the dragon would lash out or retreat. But he never gave up. His work, both technical and interpersonal, required persistence, and he had plenty of that. As the days passed, the dragon's behavior changed subtly but unmistakably. It followed him with its eyes whenever he moved, its massive head turning to track him, and occasionally it would step closer without hesitation. Other dragons began to notice too, hesitating when they saw the deadliest dragon paying attention to the human. Even the aliens who monitored everything started to whisper nervously. Something was happening that none of them fully understood. By the end of the second week, a bond had begun to form. The dragon still had moments of unpredictability, still required patience and care, but it had begun to recognize the mechanic as something different. He was not a threat, and he was not someone to be ignored. Slowly and visibly, the foundation of trust was being laid, a trust that would soon astonish the most powerful being on the planet. The mechanic did not seek recognition, and he did not try to challenge the alien queen. He simply continued his work, moving among machines and dragons alike with steady focus and calm determination. Yet even in these early days, it was clear that his presence was changing things. The dragon's behavior, once entirely dictated by fear and dominance, was beginning to shift. And while the queen had not yet realized the full extent of this change, it was only a matter of time before she would witness something she could not ignore. The human mechanic had not planned to be a hero, and he had not sought fame or glory. He had come to repair machines and complete a mission. Yet in doing so, he had begun to touch something far greater, the loyalty and trust of a creature that no one else had ever truly reached. And the ripple of this quiet revolution was only beginning to spread. By the third week on the alien planet, the human mechanic had begun to feel a quiet sense of confidence. He had observed the dragon closely, learned its subtle cues, and even gained a small amount of its trust. But he knew that trust alone was not enough. To truly understand the creature, he needed to experiment carefully, to test how it would respond to guidance beyond mere observation. The dragon was intelligent and powerful, and any sudden move could provoke disaster. He had to be careful, patient, and precise. One morning, he arrived at the dragon's enclosure before the alien staff had begun their usual routines. The dragon was already awake, its massive eyes tracking him as he approached. He did not speak. He simply crouched at a safe distance, observing its posture, its breathing, and the way it shifted its weight. The dragon watched him in return, clearly aware that something was about to happen. The mechanic slowly raised his hand, making a simple, deliberate gesture that he had used before. To his relief, the dragon followed it with its eyes and tilted its head in recognition. This time he tried something new. Instead of merely letting the dragon observe, he took a small step closer, maintaining calm, deliberate movements. The dragon tensed slightly, wings flicking in warning, but it did not move away. The mechanic held his position, showing that he posed no threat. Gradually, the dragon relaxed again, lowering its massive head just enough to signal tentative acceptance. For the first time, he felt that he was not just being tolerated, he was being recognized as a presence the dragon could trust. Over the next few days, he began introducing small commands. Nothing aggressive, nothing threatening. Just simple movements like raising a hand, stepping aside, or pointing to an object. At first, the dragon ignored him or moved unpredictably, but the mechanic persisted, repeating the gestures consistently and rewarding any response with calm acknowledgement rather than punishment. Slowly, the dragon began to respond, first with hesitation, then with increasing confidence. It was a slow, delicate process, but it worked. The alien queen, ever watchful, was growing increasingly anxious. She had prided herself on her control over the dragons, believing that no creature could ever disobey her. Yet she had begun to notice subtle changes. Her deadliest dragon, the one that had always obeyed her commands without question, was now responding to someone else. Not just responding, sometimes it hesitated or ignored her entirely, looking instead at the human mechanic. The queen felt a mixture of disbelief and irritation. This was not supposed to happen. No human should have any influence over her dragons, and yet here was proof that it was happening. One afternoon, the mechanic attempted a more ambitious test. He laid out a simple obstacle course within the dragon's enclosure, using large objects that the creature could easily move, but that would require attention to navigate. He positioned himself at the starting point and made a small gesture, signaling the dragon to approach. At first, it simply stared, uncertain. The mechanic stayed calm, repeating the gesture without impatience. Slowly, the dragon stepped forward, carefully maneuvering around the obstacles. With each correct movement, the mechanic gave calm, quiet acknowledgement, letting the dragon know it had done well. To him, it was a small victory, but to the aliens observing from above, it was extraordinary. The deadliest dragon, the one they had feared for decades, was taking direction from a human, and it was not through force or intimidation. It was through understanding, patience, and clear communication. The queen herself could hardly watch, her pride and authority challenged in a way she had never experienced. The mechanic realized that this was only the beginning. He had gained the dragon's tentative trust, but he needed more. He began to spend longer periods with the creature, observing it, testing its reactions, and learning how it responded to stress, reward, and guidance. He noted its favorite times of day, the way it shifted its weight when nervous, and even the sounds it made when it was focused or curious. Every detail mattered. This was not a simple animal. This was a thinking, feeling being, and to guide it effectively, he needed to understand it completely. Other dragons began to take notice. They watched the deadliest dragon interacting with the human, pausing in their usual routines. The atmosphere in the enclosure shifted subtly. The mechanic could feel it, a tension between the dragons and the aliens. Even without meaning to, he had begun to disrupt the established order. Where fear and intimidation had always ruled, something new was emerging, a connection that was not based on threat, but on respect and understanding. One evening, as the mechanic was finishing his work for the day, the deadliest dragon approached him in an unusual way. It moved slowly, deliberately, stopping just a few feet away. Instead of tense movements or warning gestures, it simply watched him. He raised a hand, palm open, as he had done countless times before. To his surprise, the dragon lifted its massive head slightly, moving closer than it ever had before. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it carried enormous meaning. The creature was not just tolerating him, it was acknowledging him. The queen's attention was sharper than ever. She had begun to see patterns, and she did not like them. The human was changing the dynamics of the dragons, altering their behavior in ways she could not control. She realized that if this continued, her authority could be challenged not just by a human, but by the dragon itself. Yet even in her anger and fear, she could not deny the effectiveness of the mechanic's approach. Fear and dominance had their place, but they were not the only tools for guiding such a powerful creature. The mechanic continued patiently. He introduced small challenges for the dragon to test its intelligence and cooperation. He moved objects, signaled with gestures, and observed how it responded. Each successful response was rewarded with calm acknowledgement rather than force. The dragon began to anticipate his movements, sometimes acting before he gestured, showing that it had learned to think and respond independently. The bond was growing stronger, not because of coercion, but because of respect and mutual understanding. The aliens watching began to murmur. Some were fearful, unsure how to respond. Others were curious, seeing the potential in this human's methods. The queen, however, remained conflicted. Pride, power, and tradition had always dictated her control over the dragons, and now all of it was being challenged. She could not ignore what was happening, yet she could not fully grasp it either. The human had achieved something extraordinary, and she was powerless to stop it, at least for now. By the end of Part 3, the human mechanic had moved from cautious observation to careful experimentation. He was no longer simply surviving among the dragons, he was guiding them, testing their reactions, and building a bond that none of the aliens had ever achieved. The deadliest dragon, once feared and uncontrollable, had begun to respond to him not out of fear, but because it recognized him as someone who understood it. The stage was set for something remarkable. The queen's power, the dragon's behavior, and the human's quiet influence were all on a collision course. The bonds being formed in this enclosure would not remain a secret for long, and the consequences would shake the foundation of everything on the planet. The human mechanic, however, remained calm and focused. He had no desire to dominate, no desire to challenge the queen. All he wanted was understanding and cooperation, one careful gesture at a time. And as the deadliest dragon looked at him now, waiting for the next signal, he realized that the hardest part was only beginning. By the 4th week, the human mechanic had built a bond with the deadliest dragon that was stronger than anyone on the planet could have imagined. It was subtle, invisible to most, but unmistakable to him. The dragon now responded to gestures, tones, and calm body language, following his directions in ways that even the alien staff had never seen. But not everyone was happy about this. The alien queen had begun to feel a deep sense of unease. Her control over the dragon, which had been absolute for years, now seemed fragile. The queen decided it was time to intervene directly. She had always ruled through fear and strength, and she expected obedience without question. She approached the enclosure with a regal stride, her presence commanding the attention of every creature nearby. The dragons shifted and rumbled, acknowledging her authority. But the deadliest dragon paused. It looked from her to the human mechanic, uncertainty flickering in its glowing eyes. The queen's irritation grew, but she tried to hide it. She had never allowed anyone, not even her most trusted lieutenants, to influence her pet in this way. Standing tall, she gave a sharp command in the language of the dragons, a sound that carried over the enclosure like a thunderclap. "Return," she demanded, her voice filled with authority. For years this command had been absolute. Every dragon, especially the deadliest one, had obeyed immediately. But now something unexpected happened. The dragon hesitated, its massive head tilted, eyes flicking between the queen and the mechanic. It did not move. The queen's anger rose, but she forced herself to remain calm. She repeated the command, louder and more insistent, and the dragon still did not obey. The human mechanic watched quietly, staying calm as always. He had anticipated this moment, though he could never be sure how the dragon would react. He raised a simple hand, signaling the dragon in the gesture they had practiced together. Slowly, cautiously, the dragon turned and moved a few steps toward him. It was a small movement, but it carried enormous meaning. The queen froze, her eyes widening in shock. Her deadliest dragon, the one she had controlled through fear and power, had chosen to follow a human signal instead of hers. The queen could not believe what she was seeing. Years of dominance, thousands of hours of training, and the sheer terror she inspired had all been swept aside by the quiet patience and understanding of a human mechanic. She stepped closer, trying again, her voice rising with command and authority. But the dragon stayed where it was, watching the human, waiting for his next signal. Every step she took seemed to make no difference. She had never been ignored in this way, and the realization unsettled her deeply. The mechanic, aware of her presence but calm as always, spoke in soft tones, a language the dragon could not understand but whose meaning it somehow grasped. He moved slowly, signaling the dragon to step around an obstacle nearby. The creature obeyed perfectly, its massive claws carefully navigating the terrain, ignoring the queen's frustrated calls. The queen's shock turned to anger, but she was also fascinated. She could not deny the skill, patience, and insight the human had shown. Her mind, trained to see obedience through fear as the only measure of control, struggled to process what she was witnessing. For the first time, the queen began to see that fear was not the only way to guide these powerful creatures. The human mechanic had achieved what she never had: voluntary trust. The dragon had not obeyed out of fear. It had chosen to respond to someone who understood it. That idea was foreign, almost incomprehensible, but it was undeniable. She watched almost reluctantly as the dragon completed a series of simple tasks under the mechanic's guidance. Each movement was precise, each step deliberate, showing intelligence and awareness that no alien had ever fully appreciated. The alien staff surrounding the enclosure whispered nervously. Some were in awe, unable to deny the reality of what they were witnessing. Others were fearful, unsure how the queen would react to this challenge to her authority. But the mechanic stayed focused, calm as always. He knew that fear or aggression could undo the progress he had made. He continued his gestures slowly, signaling the dragon to turn, step forward, and pause. Each action was met with obedience, not because the dragon was forced, but because it trusted him. The queen, her pride wounded, realized that she had underestimated the human. She had relied on her own methods of control, but they were proving ineffective against someone who approached the dragon differently. She could feel her authority challenged. But she was also learning something new. Patience, observation, and calm consistency could achieve what fear could not. She could not admit it aloud, but she was watching, learning, and realizing that the human mechanic had unlocked a skill she had never possessed. Later that day, the human tested the dragon's responses in more complex ways. He placed objects in its path and used subtle gestures to guide it around them. The dragon followed flawlessly, navigating obstacles that even some alien trainees struggled with. The queen observed silently, her anger and amazement mingling. Her deadliest dragon, once untouchable, was now cooperating with a human. And the cooperation was not mechanical obedience, it was intelligent, deliberate, and voluntary. The queen finally approached the mechanic, her steps deliberate and careful. She demanded an explanation for the dragon's behavior. The mechanic, as calm as ever, spoke softly. He explained that the dragon responded to understanding, not force. Consistency, patience, and gentle guidance had earned its trust. He had not used fear, threat, or punishment. Instead, he had simply taken the time to notice how it thought, how it moved, and what it valued. The queen listened, her mind turning over every word. She had always relied on power and intimidation, but here was a different approach, one that had proven successful in ways she could not deny. For the first time, the queen felt a sense of humility. She realized that her methods, though effective in many ways, were limited. The human mechanic had shown that even the most dangerous and independent creatures could be guided through respect and understanding. And the dragon's choice to follow him over her was a clear demonstration of that principle. She could not ignore it, nor could she undo the bond that had formed. By the evening, the atmosphere in the enclosure had shifted. The dragon stayed close to the mechanic, no longer wary or defensive, but alert and cooperative. The queen stood nearby, silent but attentive, processing what she had seen. The humans and aliens around them sensed the change. Something fundamental had shifted in the balance of power. It was no longer just fear and dominance that dictated behavior. The quiet influence of understanding, patience, and consistency had made its mark. The human mechanic continued to guide the dragon through a series of simple tasks, each one completed with precision and intelligence. The queen observed every movement, every response, and every subtle cue. She realized that the dragon had learned to choose cooperation voluntarily. Fear had not been required. Authority alone had not been sufficient. The human had done what she could not, earned loyalty without intimidation. By the end of the day, the queen had to acknowledge a simple truth. She had been outdone. The deadliest dragon, her most feared pet, was now responding more readily to a human than to her. And the human, calm, patient, and observant, had done so without weapons, threats, or authority. The realization was humbling, even shocking, but it also opened a door. If she could learn from him, perhaps there was more to leadership and influence than she had ever understood. The human mechanic, unaware of the full impact of his actions on the queen's mind, simply continued his work. He had no desire to dominate or challenge her. He only sought understanding, consistency, and cooperation. And as the dragon followed his gestures with intelligence and trust, it became clear that something extraordinary had begun, a shift that would change the relationship between humans, dragons, and even the most powerful alien ruler on the planet. After the events of the fourth week, the dynamic between the human mechanic, the deadliest dragon, and the alien queen had shifted in ways no one could have predicted. The queen, who had always relied on fear and absolute authority to maintain control, now watched with a mixture of astonishment, curiosity, and reluctant respect. Her deadliest dragon, the one that had once obeyed only her commands, now responded more readily to the human mechanic's gestures, tones, and calm guidance. This change was subtle but unmistakable, and it left the queen unsettled in ways she had never experienced before. The human mechanic, unaware of the full impact his actions had on the queen, continued to focus on the dragon. His goal was not to dominate or compete, but to understand and communicate. He spent long hours observing every movement, every twitch of muscle, and every sound the dragon made. He had learned that even the smallest gesture could mean the difference between cooperation and hesitation. The dragon was intelligent and independent, and he treated it as such, respecting its choices while guiding it gently. One morning, the mechanic decided to increase the complexity of their interactions. He arranged several obstacles and platforms in the dragon's enclosure, requiring it to navigate a path that would test both its intelligence and its patience. As he prepared, the dragon observed quietly, its glowing eyes following his every movement. The mechanic raised a hand, signaling the start of the exercise. At first, the dragon hesitated, uncertain how to proceed, but as he continued to gesture calmly, it began to move carefully, stepping over obstacles and around barriers with precision. Each successful movement was met with a small, calm acknowledgement from the mechanic, a nod, a gentle hand gesture, or a quiet tone of encouragement. The dragon responded to these subtle cues, learning to anticipate his intentions and act accordingly. The aliens observing from the perimeter whispered among themselves, astonished at what they were seeing. The deadliest dragon, the one they had feared for decades, was following a human's guidance voluntarily. Without fear or intimidation, the queen approached the enclosure, her regal presence commanding attention. She had watched many times before, but this day was different. The dragon paused in its movements as she drew near, glancing between her and the mechanic. The queen expected obedience, yet the dragon's attention remained on the human. For the first time, she felt a sense of vulnerability. Her authority, once absolute, seemed less certain. The mechanic, calm and focused as always, noticed the dragon's hesitation and used a slow, deliberate gesture to guide it past a particularly tricky obstacle. The dragon complied flawlessly, ignoring the queen's unspoken expectations. This moment left the queen both frustrated and intrigued. She realized that her approach, based on dominance and fear, had limitations. The mechanic's methods, patience, consistency, and understanding, had achieved something she had never been able to do. The dragon was not just obeying, it was choosing to cooperate. The realization was humbling. She began to see that leadership and influence could be built on trust and respect, rather than only on fear and authority. The mechanic continued to expand the dragon's exercises. He introduced new challenges requiring the dragon to navigate more complex paths and respond to more subtle gestures. Each time the dragon succeeded, reinforcing the bond between them. The more the dragon trusted him, the more confident it became in its movements. It was learning to think, anticipate, and act independently, all under the gentle guidance of the human mechanic. This was a level of cooperation that had never been seen on the planet before. As the days passed, the bond between the human and the dragon grew stronger. The dragon began to seek his attention, moving closer when he entered the enclosure and responding more quickly to his gestures. It was no longer a creature driven by instinct or fear. It was an intelligent partner, aware of his presence and willing to work with him. The queen, though still cautious, began to observe quietly, realizing that this human had unlocked a new way to guide her most powerful creature. The mechanic also began to notice changes in the other dragons. They watched the deadliest dragon interacting with him and began to pause, observing the new dynamic. The atmosphere in the enclosure shifted subtly. The balance of fear and respect that had dominated for years was changing. The human's influence was spreading, not through force or threat, but through example and understanding. Even the queen had to admit silently that this approach held power she had never fully appreciated. One evening, as the sun set and the sky glowed with alien colors, the mechanic and the dragon practiced new exercises. The dragon moved with precision, its massive wings occasionally stretching as it balanced on elevated platforms. The mechanic used calm gestures and quiet tones to guide it through a series of increasingly difficult maneuvers. Each success reinforced the bond between them, and the dragon's confidence grew. It no longer hesitated in its movements and even anticipated some of the mechanic's signals. The queen, standing nearby, watched in silence. She felt a mixture of awe and unease. Her deadliest dragon, once untouchable, was now acting with intelligence and cooperation under the guidance of a human. She could not deny the effectiveness of his methods, yet she struggled to reconcile this with her own understanding of power and control. The human had achieved something extraordinary, and she was powerless to stop it. Over the following days, the mechanic continued to refine the bond. He introduced subtle variations in the gestures and movements, testing the dragon's awareness and intelligence. The dragon responded with increasing skill, navigating complex obstacles and performing actions that required both thought and precision. It was clear that the dragon was learning not just to obey, but to think, anticipate, and act in cooperation with him. The queen began to experiment herself, attempting to guide the dragon in the same way the human did. She found it difficult. The dragon had learned to trust and respond to calm, consistent guidance, not fear or sudden commands. Her attempts, though well-intentioned, were met with hesitation. The human had demonstrated something she had never mastered, the ability to earn loyalty through respect and understanding, rather than through dominance. By the end of Part 5, the human mechanic had not only gained the deadliest dragon's trust, but had also begun to reshape the queen's understanding of leadership. She realized that strength alone was not enough, and that true influence came from understanding, patience, and respect. The bond between human and dragon was growing stronger every day, and even the queen had to acknowledge silently that the methods he used were extraordinary. The stage was set for a final transformation, one that would change the relationship between the queen, the dragons, and the human forever. The bond formed through patience, trust, and understanding had proven its power. The queen's perception of control, loyalty, and authority was being challenged in ways she could never have predicted. And the human mechanic, calm, patient, and observant, had become the key to something far greater than he could have imagined, a connection that would redefine the dynamics of power on the planet. By the 6th week on the alien planet, the bond between the human mechanic and the deadliest dragon had grown incredibly strong. What had started as cautious observation had become a partnership built on trust, patience, and understanding. The dragon, once feared as uncontrollable, now responded to his gestures, tones, and presence with intelligence and cooperation. It moved with purpose, anticipating his intentions, and performing tasks that no alien, not even the queen herself, could command in the same way. The alien queen watched quietly from her chambers. She had spent years ruling through fear and strength, and yet here was proof that another approach existed, one she had never mastered. The human mechanic had done what she could not. He had earned loyalty without intimidation. Her dragon, the most feared creature in the galaxy, had chosen to follow him, not because it feared punishment, but because it trusted him. For the first time, the queen felt a mix of awe, respect, and a little unease. She was witnessing a new kind of power, one that did not rely on domination. That morning, the mechanic entered the dragon's enclosure with his usual calm presence. The dragon lifted its massive head at his arrival, eyes glowing with recognition. It approached him slowly, moving with confidence but still alert, aware of its surroundings. The mechanic extended a hand in a gesture they had practiced for weeks. The dragon stopped just a few feet away, waiting, and then slowly lowered its massive head toward him, a clear sign of trust and acknowledgement. He began a new series of exercises, more complex than ever before. He arranged obstacles, narrow pathways, and platforms that required balance, precision, and timing. The dragon navigated them flawlessly, following his gestures, responding to subtle cues, and even correcting itself if it hesitated or misstepped. The human's calm encouragement and consistent signals guided the dragon without any hint of fear or force. Every success strengthened the bond, and the dragon seemed almost to enjoy the challenges, displaying intelligence and awareness in a way no alien had anticipated. The queen, observing from a short distance, was deeply intrigued. She had always believed that fear was the only reliable way to command loyalty, yet this human had demonstrated otherwise. The dragon's obedience was not automatic. It was thoughtful and deliberate. She began to reflect on her own methods, realizing that she had relied too much on intimidation and not enough on understanding. Slowly, she began to see the value in the human mechanic's approach. As the day progressed, the mechanic introduced more subtle challenges. He would raise a hand or tilt his body slightly, and the dragon would respond immediately. It seemed to anticipate his intentions, acting not out of compulsion but out of comprehension. For example, he would gesture toward a platform and the dragon would leap precisely, landing safely and positioning itself to continue. He rewarded each correct action with calm acknowledgement, never raising his voice or showing frustration. The dragon's responses became faster, smoother, and more precise, demonstrating not just obedience but a form of intelligent collaboration. Other dragons watched in silence. They observed the interaction between the mechanic and the deadliest dragon, noticing how the creature responded without fear or aggression. Slowly, they began to follow his example, though not as quickly or completely. The atmosphere in the enclosure had changed. Fear was no longer the primary motivator. Curiosity, respect, and trust were taking its place. The human mechanic had shifted the dynamic, not only with the deadliest dragon but with the entire group of creatures. The queen approached closer, compelled by curiosity. She stepped carefully, aware that her presence alone could influence the dragon. She called out a command, the tone she had always used to demand obedience, but the dragon did not immediately respond to her voice. Instead, it turned toward the mechanic, waiting for his signal. For the first time, the queen realized that authority alone could not compel loyalty. She had underestimated the importance of trust, consistency, and understanding. The human mechanic noticed the queen's presence but remained focused on the dragon. He used a slow, deliberate gesture to guide the creature through a series of complex movements. The dragon followed perfectly, ignoring the queen's commands and responding only to the cues it had learned to trust. The queen watched in astonishment, her pride mingling with a growing respect. She realized that the human mechanic had not only earned the dragon's loyalty, but had also taught her a lesson in leadership that she would never forget. By mid-afternoon, The mechanic had completed the exercises and allowed the dragon to rest. The creature lay on the ground, massive wings folded yet alert and attentive. The mechanic knelt beside it, speaking softly in calm tones and gently running his hand along the dragon's scales. The dragon leaned slightly into the gesture, a clear sign of trust. It was a moment of quiet connection, one that no alien had ever experienced with this creature before. The queen approached slowly, unsure of how to react. She had spent decades commanding the deadliest dragon through fear, yet here it was, responding with loyalty and cooperation to someone she had once considered insignificant. She spoke carefully, asking the mechanic how he had achieved such a remarkable bond. He explained that the dragon responded to understanding, not fear, to consistency, not aggression, to respect, not dominance. The queen listened silently, processing the words and the undeniable truth before her eyes. Over the following days, the mechanic continued to strengthen the bond. He guided the dragon through increasingly complex exercises, gradually introducing other dragons into the routines. The deadliest dragon acted as a model, showing the others that cooperation could be built on trust rather than intimidation. The queen observed quietly, learning the subtle techniques he used: small gestures, consistent signals, calm tones, and careful patience. She realized that her perspective on power and control was changing, and that the human mechanic had accomplished something truly extraordinary. One evening, as the alien sun began to set, painting the sky with glowing shades of orange and purple, the mechanic and the dragon moved through a final series of exercises for the day. The dragon moved with confidence, precision, and intelligence, responding to gestures with remarkable understanding. The mechanic rewarded each movement with calm acknowledgement and gentle encouragement. The queen, watching from nearby, felt a profound shift. She had seen the impossible. A human, through patience, understanding, and consistency, had earned the loyalty of her most feared and powerful creature. By the end of the day, the dynamic had changed completely. The deadliest dragon followed the mechanic's guidance willingly, moving with intelligence, precision, and trust. The queen stood silently, acknowledging the achievement without words. The mechanic had not sought power or authority. He had simply sought understanding. Yet in doing so, he had redefined the relationship between humans, dragons, and even the most powerful alien ruler on the planet. For the first time, the queen understood that influence was not solely about fear or dominance. True loyalty could be earned through respect, patience, and understanding. The bond between the human mechanic and the dragon had shown her that leadership could be built on trust rather than terror. It was a revelation that would change the way she governed her dragons and her people forever. As night fell and the alien stars began to glow in the sky, the mechanic stood beside the dragon, both of them calm and connected. The queen observed quietly, knowing that she had witnessed something extraordinary. The deadliest dragon, once feared and untouchable, had chosen a human over her commands. And in that choice, a new understanding had been born, a lesson in trust, respect, and the quiet power of patience. The human mechanic had come to the planet to repair machines, to complete a mission. But in the process, he had achieved something far greater. He had built a bridge between species, earned the loyalty of the most powerful dragon, and taught the alien queen a lesson in leadership that she would never forget. The bond he had created would last, reshaping the dynamics of power and trust on the planet. And through patience, understanding, and quiet determination, he had proven that even the deadliest creature could follow the guidance of someone who approached it with respect, care, and insight.